Most farms treat bedding like trash. In reality, deep bedding is one of the only systems that simultaneously reduces disease pressure, builds carbon, captures nitrogen, and produces compost while animals are still standing on it. In the next few minutes, we'll see exactly why ammonia disappears in functioning packs, how bedding reaches pathogen kill temperatures, and how farms turn stall waste into stored nitrogen and finish compost without adding equipment or labor. If you think bedding is just something to shovel, this is going to change how you see your entire operation. Deep bedding is a carbon-driven bioreactor operating under livestock. It's not about keeping animals dry. It's about controlling nitrogen, oxygen flow, and microbial metabolism using carbon as fuel. When manure hits bare ground or thin bedding, three things happen immediately. Nitrogen volatilizes as ammonia, moisture creates anaerobic pockets, and pathogens proliferate. A deep bedding system interrupts all three. In a functioning pack, bacteria immobilize nitrogen faster than it can gas off. That's why ammonia levels drop instead of rising. Well-constructed deep packs develop internal temperatures of 113 to 150 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, E. coli populations collapse, Salmonella survival plummets, and Coccidia oocysts degrade. Fly cycles break, and odor-causing bacteria lose their anaerobic shelter. At the same time, fungi wake up. Once the oxygen and carbon balance correctly, fungal networks stabilize the pack instead of letting it rot. That shift is the difference between composting and stalling. A shallow bed rots from the bottom up, but a deep pack cooks from the inside out. When the pack works, something counterintuitive happens. It dries itself. Thermal rise drives vapor up and out of the bedding, leaving the surface dry even when the core carries moisture upward. That is why well-run deep bedding doesn't stink, it doesn't collapse, and it doesn't need daily stripping. It self-stabilizes through biology. Deep bedding works because carbon changes how nitrogen behaves. Fresh manure is chemically unstable. Urine nitrogen converts to ammonia in hours unless something binds it. In open systems, 40 to 70% of nitrogen is lost to volatilization in the first few days after manure deposition. Deep bedding stops that loss at the molecular level. Carbon doesn't just soak up nitrogen, microbes do. Nitrogen that would have escaped as gas becomes bacterial protein, fungal tissue, and stored organic nitrogen inside the pack. Now consider the heat. The moment microbes start consuming carbon, they respire. Every gram of carbon oxidized releases actual metabolic heat, not just warm manure. That heat is the system doing its job. Moisture makes the system stronger, not weaker, as long as carbon is present. Dry carbon insulates, while wet carbon fuels fermentation. Packs don't fail because they're too wet. They fail because they're carbon-starved. Now here's how that biology actually looks in real buildings, starting with chickens. With chickens, deep bedding lives or dies by whether nitrogen stays in the building or leaves as ammonia. Fresh chicken manure is around 1.5 to 1.8% nitrogen by weight and over 70% moisture. If that nitrogen isn't grabbed by carbon immediately, it volatilizes. A deep pack that works is never thin. If your bedding is under 8 inches, you're not running a system, you're stockpiling manure. Real performance starts at 10 to 12 inches. That's the depth where oxygen stays in the pack while urine stays bound, which stops nitrogen loss. Material choice matters more than brand or price. Pine shavings work because they don't collapse. They maintain pore space, which keeps microbes aerobic and traps nitrogen in biomass. Straw fails when it's used wrong, not because straw is bad, but because loose straw mats quickly. Once it mats, oxygen drops and ammonia spikes. If you use straw, it must be chopped and layered with something rigid like shavings, chips, or coarse sawdust, or it becomes bacteria soup. Hemp is the most forgiving bedding you can run. It holds up to 4 times its weight in moisture and resists compaction longer than pine. If you can get it, it's the easiest material to keep stable through winter. Now for the ammonium lock that almost nobody uses. Once a month, dust the surface lightly with ash or biochar. Ash raises surface pH, which slows ammonia volatilization, while biochar binds ammonium directly. That nitrogen stays in the pack, not in the air. On farms that run carbon-rich packs, Ammonia levels routinely measure 40 to 70% lower than shallow bedding systems with identical stocking rates. A working chicken pack will run warm internally, typically 110 to 130 degrees at 6 to 12 inches down, which suppresses destructive bacteria and fly larvae without sterilizing beneficial organisms. By spring, you're not hauling waste. You're removing a nitrogen-stabilized compost with higher retained nitrogen than uncovered piles, stronger fungal populations, and lower nitrogen burn risk in soil. Field trials consistently show deep bedding compost supports 2 to 3 times more microbial diversity than manure stockpiles or turned compost because it never goes anaerobic. If your chicken floor isn't doing that, you don't have deep bedding. You just have manure you haven't dealt with yet. For goats and sheep, deep bedding is less about composting and more about climate control and ground level. If the surface stays dry, your animals stay sound. If it stays wet, you grow foot rot instead of livestock. Foot rot organisms activate fastest at about 60% surface moisture and explode between 70 to 90 degrees, which is exactly what sloppy bedding creates. If bedding is damp at hoof level, the system is already failing. Material matters here more than for any other species. Straw works, but only if it stays fluffy. Once straw mats, oxygen drops, and bacterial pressure spikes. Corn stalks are stronger structurally and hold airspace longer, which is why they outperform straw in humid barns. Old hay works when you treat it as carbon, not feed. If it's dusty and coarse, it absorbs urine extremely well. Wood shavings belong under straw or stalks, not on top. They capture urine while stalks and straw protect the surface. The microbial side that most people miss is that internal pack heat suppresses parasite survival. At sustained pack temperatures above 104 degrees Fahrenheit, many nematode eggs fail to mature. Above 113 degrees Fahrenheit, larval survival collapses. That matters because over 70% of small ruminant parasite loads live in bedding and loafing zones, not pasture. Deep bedding done correctly shifts parasite pressure out of the barn and into a controlled system. The rule that keeps goats alive and sound. Never wait for a smell. Top-dress carbon before the bedding darkens. The surface turns slick. A smell appears, or hooves get warm while standing still. Once weekly light carbon beats monthly deep cleaning every time. Real farms running dry packs see up to 50% lower foot rot incidence and reduce bedding change frequency by 40 to 60%, with noticeably lower winter parasite loads. If your goats are coughing, limping, or have soaking hooves, your bedding is not deep, it's just wet. A real deep pack makes the barn warmer, drier, and cleaner as winter goes on. Pigs are the fastest compost engine on a farm. Pigs don't just use bedding, they digest it mechanically. Nothing on 4 legs mixes carbon, moisture, bacteria, and oxygen faster than a hog. Depth matters first. Anything under 12 inches is just waste storage. Real fermentation starts above 18 inches. By 30 to 36 inches, the bottom third is already converting into stabilized humus. Here's why pigs outperform every other species. While cattle compact and chickens scratch, pigs shred fiber, drive oxygen downward, churn nitrogen into carbon, prevent matting, and build temperature through friction. Internal temperatures in well-run pig systems regularly reach 120 to 145 degrees, hotter than many static compost piles. A correct pig pack finishes 60 to 120 days faster than static compost. That's not an opinion, it's math. Mechanical disturbance alone cuts compost time by 40 to 60% because pigs keep carbon oxygenated instead of sealed. The compost quality is measurably different. Labs show pig-finished compost has a higher humus fraction, higher cation exchange capacity, lower ammonia-nitrogen loss, and better aggregate stability. Field infiltration tests routinely show 2 to 4 times faster water absorption on pig-bedded compost compared to scrape manure. Odor control is not magic, it's microbial dominance. When your pack goes anaerobic, you smell sulfur and ammonia. When it stays aerobic, you smell the forest floor. If your pig pack smells bad, you're starving microbes of carbon, not failing at sanitation. One mistake destroys pig systems faster than anything else. Flat bedding. Pigs must be layered. Carbon first, manure second, carbon again. This sandwiches nitrogen into fungal networks instead of letting it gas off. Rotational bedding zones take this further. When pigs cycle between zones, each pack gets oxygen resets and thermal recovery periods. Well-managed pig packs reduce total bedding inputs by 30 to 50% over time because material is transformed under the animal. If pigs are rooting carbon and lying dry on top of warm bedding, the system is printing soil. For cattle, deep bedding stops being just compost and starts becoming feed efficiency. In cold climates, bedding is insulation, and insulation is metabolism. When cattle stand on frozen manure or bare ground, they burn calories just to keep their hooves warm. Hoof tissue alone can leak 10 to 15% of total body heat in winter. Once that heat escapes, the animal compensates with feed. A correct bedding pack changes the math immediately. A 12 to 24-inch pack creates a thermal barrier that raises surface temperature under the hoof by 10 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit compared to concrete. University cold stress trials show cattle resting on deep bedding require 10 to 20% less feed in sub-freezing conditions to maintain body condition. Insulation also controls ammonia, which protects lung function. Every time ammonia rises above 20 ppm, intake drops. Above 50 ppm, respiratory infections spike. Carbon locks ammonia, which is why deep-bedded barns smell like hay while scraped barns smell like loss. Depth alone is not the system. Moisture balance decides success. The fix is always the same. Add carbon early, not when it stinks. By the time you smell ammonia, nitrogen has already escaped. The most efficient cattle packs are run like slow compost piles with carbon added on a rhythm. The reward is less pneumonia, tighter feed conversion, warmer animals, and cleaner udders. Deep bedding works because it is chemically hostile to pathogens. Most livestock diseases thrive in moisture, low oxygen, and free nitrogen. Deep carbon bedding deletes all three. First, nitrogen never becomes ammonia. In carbon-loaded bedding, microbes grab nitrogen immediately and lock it into biomass. In control trials, deep packs show 50 to 70% lower ammonia than scraped barns. Less ammonia equals fewer respiratory infections and stronger immunity. Deep bedding forces aerobic decay, which creates compost microbes that physically crowd out disease organisms through competitive exclusion. A correct pack smells like forest soil. Most farms ruin the bedding the moment animals leave it by spreading it raw or piling it wet, which turns carbon into rot and nitrogen into air. Done wrong, you lose 40 to 70% of your nitrogen in 3 months. Done right, bedding becomes soil. First, consider sheet composting. Lay packs flat at 2 to 4 inches deep so oxygen and nitrogen stay in the system. Field trials show 30 to 50% higher nitrogen retention this way. Second, tree ring mulching. Bedding improves soil structure and releases nitrogen slowly for fruit trees. Orchard trials show 15 to 25% faster trunk growth under composted bedding than raw wood mulch. Third, hugel pads. Pack bedding into brush piles to decompose 2 to 3 times faster than wood alone. Fourth, pasture top dressing. Spread thin, 1 inch or less, to add 1,500 to 2,500 pounds of organic matter per acre. Fifth, fungal beds. Lay it 6 to 8 inches thick to grow your own soil microbes. Why do most systems fail? The number one killer is carbon starvation. Without enough carbon, nitrogen volatilizes and stinks. The second failure is the wrong carbon size. Fine materials like dust collapse and seal oxygen out, creating slime. The sweet spot is shredded or chopped carbon. The third failure is no oxygen. Without air movement, you don't get heat and pathogens win. The fourth failure is letting it get wet. Ammonia leaves wet packs, not dry ones. The fifth failure is no layering. Deep bedding saves money in places farmers usually don't track. Manure handling often costs $3,000 to $15,000 a year in labor and fuel. Deep bedding collapses this category. Then there is fertilizer. Farms using real carbon bedding can cut commercial inputs by 20 to 40% because they are finally holding the nutrients they produce. Veterinary costs drop as dry packs break parasite cycles. When a pack finishes, you have compost with higher humus content and better water infiltration than manure or slurry ever creates. What species are you bedding, and what material are you using right now? Share what is working or failing on your farm so others can learn. If this breakdown of the hidden biology beneath your livestock has changed the way you look at your barn floor, please subscribe and like the video. We are digging up the agricultural wisdom that has been buried for far too long. Start growing your future today. The next treasury of farming secrets will be opened very soon.